pianist and teacher and accompanist. A lot of what I do is playing for people for performances, exams, auditions, and I'm often given music at short notice, often quite difficult music, and I have to be able to perform it on demand. Now, I would love to have enough time to be able to practice lots and lots and lots and make it perfect and polished for the performance, but the reality is, in my job with the amount of accompanying I have to do, that's not always possible. So I'd like to share with you today some strategies that I use to take a fiendishly difficult piece. In this case, we're going to be talking about the Chopin Polonaise Brilliant for the cello and piano, and how you can practice that to be able to get it up to performance standard fairly quickly. This is an interesting piece because it sounds like Chopin wrote a fantastic piano part and kind of went to a cello friend, hey, can you come and play this melody line along with my millions of notes? And it's also very difficult because it's like there's 6 different etudes in one piece. So every time there's a passage, it sounds difficult. You know, there's this kind of thing, and there's this kind of thing, and then he repeats it, but instead of doing it precisely the same, he just changes it up a little bit, which completely changes the technical formation of it and completely changes how you have to practice it. And then there's only 8 bars of it or something. So I'm going to show you how I tackled this piece to make it manageable in a short amount of time. First thing I'd say is to just think really carefully about your fingering and fix it so that it's really natural. The very opening passage of this is and the second version of it starts on D. And it's got this pattern where it looks like it makes sense to continue the same fingering as in a pattern. I'm doing 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1. I thought, okay, I'll continue the pattern just because the pattern's easy to remember, but the physical formation of the notes means that actually, after a few days of not nailing that part, I realised that I actually just need to make it fit my hand naturally and do 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and keep going with that. 2, 3, 4, 1. That small change to using 3, 4 was enough to mean that this passage no longer posed me any problems. Whereas before, every time I played it, pretty much I would stumble over it. Make sure that your fingering is really natural wherever possible, and write it in. The second that you write it in, you don't have to think about it again. Write as much fingering in as you can. Just slow your interpretation where possible. I mean, there's a wide range of how particularly this opening passage could be played. Right, you know, he tells us it's lento, we get a metronome mark, crotchet equals 89, and we get leggerissimo. I've heard it performed really fast, and I've heard it performed slower, and the fact is it can sound good slower too, so why put yourself under pressure and have to go really, really fast? So, you know, I think as long as it's really light, it sounds fine. Rearrange things where possible, where it makes it a lot easier and where it won't be noticed. So for example, at A, now it sounds kind of easy. It's not, the semiquavers aren't that fast and it's just an arpeggio kind of pattern, but he does that thing that he does in his first C major etude where it looks like it's his arpeggio pattern, but the fact is that it's stretch over a 10th. So it's actually quite hard to get from this G, here we're actually stretch over an 11th to the C. So the accuracy of that, it actually takes some practice. It doesn't just sit under the hand really naturally. If you really didn't have enough time, if you were sight reading, if you had one session to kind of run through it, you might want to kind of consider doing something that just reduced those intervals a bit but stayed within the chord. I'm not too fussed about making sure every single tiny note is perfectly in place. Remember, this is a sight reading / very small amount of preparation type context. This is not for a really polished performance where obviously you want to learn it precisely and do it really beautifully. This is for in the context of when you've got lots and lots of music that you have to perform at short notice. These are the things that can get you through. Another strategy is along the same lines, but it's about simplifying it. There's a skill in doing this, in working out where you can make simplifications without it being noticed or missed. And, you know, there's different levels here. Noticed or missed by, first of all, an audience who doesn't know the piece all that well. You know, they're just going to enjoy the music no matter what. Well, that's probably going to be fine. And then there's a level of noticed or missed by someone who knows the piece, by a musician. And, you know, they're going to notice this stuff, but the skill is being able to do it in a way that doesn't make it not true to the original music. So, for example, now these top thirds, I just start to release the bottom line of it as I get up to the top of it, just so that I don't have to really drill that passage to get it really perfectly. The cadenza-like passage, this, and then you've got these legatissimo triplets again. Again, I simplify this by just dropping out the second and third triplet in the left hand, and it means I can get it fast enough. Obviously it loses a little bit of the depth in the sound, but again, context is that we've got a performance tonight, tomorrow, whatever. I also use a bit of rubato there to my benefit, so, you know, just I can take some liberties with the tempo at the start there. I feel like it's musically fine, just to go a bit slower at the start and then to speed up, give me a little bit of a chance to process what's coming and not have to play the whole thing super, super fast. Same at the end, I could slow down potentially if I wanted to. Another passage where I made some simplifications is towards the end here a little bit. There's some really difficult stuff going on here that just requires lots of time for drilling and practice to be able to get it up to tempo. And so I decided that musically it would be better for me to simplify it rather than kind of churn through it and play unevenly or inaccurately. So for example, after this passage here, we get to this A flat major section, and you know, he's got these little delicate little things written, repeated notes, and that's fine, that's great, you know, if you can play it, go for it, but to be able to play it at tempo, because the cellist has got this great big long note and she wants to move off it, she doesn't want to give you time to be able to play that, so I just ended up simplifying those chords, which also made me much more aware of that melody that's happening within the chord in the piano. So just tried to sort of bring that out, and then I continued with the chords simplified rather than playing the repeated notes, which would require a lot of practice. And it meant that I could play it really at the tempo the cellist wanted to play, and then here, he's done this thing where you've got to do this. Sounds fantastic, but to be really confident about playing it accurately, it needs lots of drilling. So I decided that musically it was better, because I was not going to have the time to drill this bit, to go like this. Now, there are some people here who might be, oh, she's just changing his music. Well, the reality is that in that moment, that is going to have a much, much better effect than me trying to sort of scramble through that passage messily. And instead we get this. And then a nice contrast into the next section. So then there are some passages that just can't be simplified. You lose the musical effect and just require drilling and practice. And so you identify which ones are the important ones to really make sure that you spend the time on drilling. For me, that's the con forza passage, the fortissimo passage here. And I always feel quite pleased when I get to the bottom and get to that G and I make it. And to get to that level, I did a whole lot of drilling exercises. One was, it's 4-2, then thumb, and then 4-2, and then thumb, and then 4-2, and then thumb, and then 4-2, and thumb, and so on. And it's just, it seems like it should be quite easy, but it's just a slightly unnatural amount of turning that you do compared to scales. So I just practiced 4-2s, so I could really feel the position that they have to get to when they turn over. Like that, over and over. I also practiced just my thumbs. So again, I could really isolate how far my thumb has to move. And then I could do the typical sort of, you know, dotted rhythms for practicing this. opposite way around. Chopin, 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 etc. And I could do a passage of a grouped long, then lots more short. Long. Oops. Long. And obviously my turning there is not accurate, so I've got to fix that. I also found that the most important part for me to get right was the very opening where I had my left hand moving at the same time because I couldn't concentrate on both my hands. So I would practice just there to make sure I landed here accurately together. And once I got there together, I was much more confident that I could then get down the rest of it because then I just had my right hand to worry about. The other really important thing is actually figuring out what the physical challenges are. So in this, as in like consciously knowing rather than just kind of going, oh, I'll drill it enough to be able to do it. And one of the physical challenges in this is that when you're open like this at the piano, this turning that you have to do in the right hand, it's a bigger turn that you have to do because of the angle of your arm compared to once you're down here. Then there's a very small amount of turn. Your arm doesn't do anything at all, it's just your fingers. So it's actually, as you're moving down the piano, the action changes. Once I consciously figured that out, I was able to then go, oh, okay, so I'm turning here, open up my arm a little bit, make sure my elbow is helping with the turnover. And as I get down here, it becomes more of my finger work until I make it down there to the C and celebrate, yay. I just realised, sorry, I said G before when I made it down to the bottom, let's see. And it is a celebration, of course, at that point, because, you know, the cello comes in with you on that bottom note as well, and if you've made it, it's definitely worth celebrating. Another passage that required lots of drilling is the passage from N. Now, this was the challenge here. And the key was figuring out what was stopping me from getting this arpeggio clean, that there, and also this arpeggio clean, sorry, starting here. And I realised that I needed to get my elbow and arm in on the turn over to make sure that I was able to get all the way over and the rest of my fingers into position immediately. If I didn't use my elbow and arm, then my fourth finger has come over, but my other fingers are not yet in position, and so there's always a little bit of a splash there. So, but if I use my arm to get my whole hand over into position, there. Some passages just simply need to be memorised. So, for example, from D, a bar after D, there's this passage here. This is not one that can be simplified. It's not one that can be really left out without losing the music. So again, it just needs to be learnt. I just used a really conscious method of memorising and just told myself that, okay, it's a D7 chord, starts on the 7th of the chord, turning over to the rotation of the chord there, repeat, and then on this one, instead of repeating it, we now start the new pattern, which is coming down the D7 pattern over to the F sharp, coming down the D7 pattern over to the F sharp, down the D7 pattern over to the F sharp. And by memorising it consciously, then I was able to do it without having to look at the music and in a really short amount of time. Let's see if I can do it now. Almost. You'll notice that I'm not doing much with my left hand. If I had more time to practice, I would get more of the left hand happening, but the reality is that it's only doing this anyway. It's absolutely acceptable just to play the bottom octave. A similar strategy I used at the passage where he changes up after the main melody, so you've got if I played it as written, that would require quite a lot of practice. So instead, I've just kind of said in my head, right, here we've got this kind of D minor 7 chord going on. So when I do those repeated 3 notes in the left hand, I just keep it there. I don't worry about having to sort of do, you know, that and then that won't really get noticed all that much, but will add a lot of practice time to what I need to do. So it's the D minor 7 chord. And then I know that we go to a C7 chord and do the same kind of pattern. The bass on G. And I just do the repeated C7 chord in the left hand, not worrying about getting the actual inversions correct. So that's how I get to a acceptable performance level for a student type performance or audition if I'm given the music on really short notice and I don't know the piece. I use these strategies for a whole lot of pieces. They're great to employ just as your sight reading as well.